I am so excited that I'm finally at a place where I'm healed enough to be able to talk about this, and enough time has passed so I can talk about it. Hey friends, it's your good friend Tim Campbell-Smith, and today I am telling you the complete truth about what it was like teaching at Conestoga College based out of Kitchener, Ontario. Conestoga College in 2023 and really into 2024 got a lot of media attention for how many international students they were attracting, how they treated their international students, and what that did to the Ontario society and economy. And I was a part of that as an instructor in their college. Now, I have an important disclaimer I have to make, and I'm gonna refer to my notes on this. This video is entirely about my experience, things I actually experienced, and my perceptions of those experiences. And in this video, I commit to giving you the facts of the matter and then my perceptions. Everything I'm going to share in this video is publicly verifiable. There are definitely other things that I could share and I could talk about, but my contracts with Conestoga, I think the word is supersede my ending with them. So even though my time with them has ended and I no longer work for them, I'm no longer under an active contract. Anything that I found out that was secret or private or couldn't otherwise be divulged to the public, that I still can't share. But I have put together lots of notes of things that I can publicly share and that are publicly verifiable. When people go public with these things, and before we go too far, I do want to set the record straight on something with the facts of the matter. People tend to ask, why are you coming clean and why are you telling us all of this? I want to tell you what happened. I was let go from Conestoga College for an honest public comment that I knew was not favorable to Conestoga College. On social media, I had made a public comment saying that Conestoga's policies disproportionately harmed international students and the faculty who teach them. The dean of the school that I was in at the time, Workforce Development, which I understand is now no longer a department, contacted me because she felt the comment was damning. And not only that, I had a large following, they have a large following, and a lot of people see it. So we don't get fired in higher education when you're contract faculty. You just don't have your contracts renewed. Even when you're me and you just got a promotion to or recently got a promotion, when you had a favorable review from faculty of my teaching skills, or I had just had a positive review of my teaching from students as well, but my contracts weren't renewed because I made that comment. So I figure if I'm gonna get in trouble for being honest, I'm gonna tell the whole truth. Before we go too far, make sure you like and subscribe for all things higher ed, business, photography, mental health, and life. I feel like once you know how the sausage is made, you can warn people about what the ingredients are. So these stories and this warning in particular goes out to any prospective students of Conestoga College, particularly who want to study business, IT, technology, or any program that's a combination thereof, or any students there who have the opportunity to continue with another program. I want to warn you possibly against this with some specifics why from a previous faculty member. I taught at Conestoga for almost 2 years. I was just shy of 2 years. I taught in multiple programs. I taught in the some kind of tech business analyst program, in cloud data management, in financial services, and more on this later, but I didn't realize that I was teaching a course at the end of the program, but I also had a contract to teach one of the courses at the beginning of the program. So those are the 3 main programs that I taught in, which originally were housed in workforce development. But now workforce development has been kind of dispersed and those programs have gone to other departments. But I do believe financial technology, which is the main program that I taught in, is still running. Cloud data management at the time of recording is still running as well. So let's get into the stories of why I don't recommend Conestoga College, particularly for business, IT, or tech to anyone. First, and probably the biggest one, you may have instructors who are ill-qualified to teach your course and know barely anything more than the students. When I was originally hired, the program manager who hired me was impressed by my track record in entrepreneurship, in consulting, and digital marketing. And I had no understanding of the program I was coming into. I was onboarded so fast, which was pretty common for a lot of people, and we'll talk about that in a bit and their onboarding process. And so when she saw that I did digital marketing, she said, I have a class that involves social media. And I said, great, I would love to teach a class that involves social media. The class was called Understanding Customer Needs Using Social Media. This is what I do. This is what I did as a digital marketer. This course was actually about big data analysis, where the springboard of data was social media data. I don't do, nor have I ever done, big data analysis for social media. I've done data analytics and data reporting. That is something I nerd out about, but not like the raw actual pulling of the data, scraping it, cleaning it, which are all terms I only learned from teaching this course, and then integrating it into other systems. So it was a wild shock when I got the course and I saw what I had to be teaching, because I realized I don't really know much of anything about what I'm teaching. And this course had been developed at a time, and I would say at the height of the frenzy of social media, when social media marketing was absolutely booming in about, I don't know, 2018 or 2019, when social media's APIs, or their permissions to get data, was at its height. But when I came in to teach the course, social media platforms had started clawing back on their APIs. So we were no longer actually able to get any live data for our students from Instagram, from Facebook. I remember we were able to get it from Twitter, and it was still called Twitter at that time. But we basically had to give them like dummy data sets to work with, because we weren't even able to get data sets from social media. The entire course revolved around teaching the students a program called Gephi for data analysis. And because there were so many students, I think there were like 7 instructors who taught the course, Customer Needs Using Social Media. And let me check here, 4 of us, myself included, had never used Gephi a day in our lives. To this day, at the time of recording, I still don't know if Gephi is used in industry or to what extent. This ties into another point I want to make, but let's come back here. So I taught the social media course, and this was at a time when workforce development was just starting to phase out their accelerated system. So workforce development, which had international students, did accelerated courses. They had more class hours, but a semester or a term was something like 6 or 7 weeks, maybe 8. It was very, very short and fast. So because I was hired in such a frenzy and there was such a need, they were starving for instructors. More on that later, because that hurt them a few ways too. The next course they had me teach was something I had never even heard of, and this is called ERPs, or Enterprise Resource Planning. I had to Google search, what is ERP? I called business friends, other consultants, to find out what ERPs were. I was not the only one. In fact, by this point, I had made friends with a teacher, a fellow teacher, they also taught the social media class. They also went on to teach the ERP classes I did. And every day we went into class, because we were on campus, we kind of made a joke to each other that we're not entirely sure what we're teaching today, and we don't totally understand the assignments or what we're teaching, because ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, was not a part of either of our careers. It was not something we were experienced with, but the college was so starving for instructors, we taught it. That semester, we really learned that to teach at Conestoga, you do not actually have to be an expert in the field. You just have to know 1 week of content more than your students do. I can confidently say, for that class, when I taught ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, I was only ever 1 week ahead of my students and what they were learning. Here's the final one, and I thought this was more shocking than my 2 stories. So one thing Conestoga did do well, and I will give them a few compliments. One thing Conestoga did do well was offer professional development trainings, workshops, and opportunities to faculty, because in theory, they want their teachers to be good teachers. I was at a professional development workshop, I forget on what, and there were two people who were also in workforce development, but they were nurses. I'm talking registered nurses, RNs. One of them was teaching accounting for healthcare, and the other one was teaching human resources for healthcare. and neither of them had experience in those disciplines. They were, again, hired. They wanted to scale back from nursing, and teaching was a nice part-time side gig. And basically the college had said, hey, you worked in healthcare. You have seen administration at some point in your life. You teach accounting, you teach human resources. And they had told me that they had the exact same experience, that they found they only had to be 1 week ahead of their students. So know that in some cases, your faculty may not actually be an expert, may not actually know the field that they're teaching in. They may have been hired out of desperation because they have industry or industry adjacent experience. The next reason why I don't recommend Conestoga College, and this was the most ethically gray zone for me, and it made me feel the weirdest and most uncomfortable. Instructors have a due diligence checklist to fail students, so students can't appeal and can't win the appeal against the instructor. Let's talk about it. My understanding is that actually that every school has a set of requirements. Conestoga's just felt longer and more confusing and not as accessible to students. It's funny because almost everything with Conestoga, like their policies, their procedures, their trainings, you can Google search and find this stuff publicly. But the policies around the appeal process and failing a class and what to do if you fail a class is actually kept kind of quiet. Instructors knew that this was a complex process that students would have to work hard just to figure out. And please note, if you're failing a class, chances are it's because you didn't work hard. So the system was kind of designed against students in the first place. Most students don't even know that faculty have this list. The only way students may have it kind of thrown in their face is when they write to the instructor and say, hey, I failed the class, or hey, what if I file an appeal? And the instructor will kind of throw it in your face and say, well, here's why you failed. Here's why you should not have grounds to be able to appeal. And I remember having curriculum guides who got on a call with me and would walk me through the due diligence checklist and go, okay, Tim, did the student come to class? Were you taking attendance? Were you do? And that is the due diligence checklist. So please note this checklist may hit change, but at the time, and I think these are all pretty safe bets still to this day, here's what was on our checklist. First was attendance. Now, we're going to talk about the attendance situation in a little bit, but first was attendance. If students did not come to class and did not come to class regularly, we could use that against them. But if instructors didn't take attendance or students did come to class, then students could use that against us. Again, attendance was a very strange situation. More on that in a bit. Next was timely feedback. I don't remember, and I no longer have access to the documents, and I wasn't going to search it down, but instructors were expected to provide timely feedback on every single assessment because it couldn't really be a shock to a student, and it was never supposed to be a shock to a student that they were at risk of failing. If you provided timely feedback, you could use that against the student. If you didn't provide timely feedback, a student could use that against the instructor and say, I wasn't receiving timely feedback. I didn't know I was in jeopardy of failing. The next thing on our due diligence checklist was to check students' online course access. Through this platform, and actually through every learning management system I've ever used, we are able to see when students log in to the course system and what they access, when they access it, how they access it, in fact, the IP address of where they access it from. We could use that against students. We could say, because it was always built into like a course syllabus and course descriptions, like you should be accessing the course this recommended this amount of times per week or per month. And we were able to tell when students didn't do that. So always make sure you're logging in and checking your course materials and actually reading through content, because I do see a lot of students who say, well, I accessed the course, and we're able to go and say, all you did was access the assignments. You didn't come to class and you didn't access the learning materials. How did you expect to learn anything about this course? Next, part of the due diligence checklist was consistency in policy enforcement. We were expected to have every policy, every rule written, verbalized, early, and often. So, for example, the late policy. So, if an instructor tries to punish you or hold you accountable for something that was not written and verbalized, early and often, they couldn't really hold you accountable for it, and a student could appeal for that. So, for example, the late policy. In my department and in the main program I taught in, financial technology, The late policy was always at the instructor's discretion. Instructors, we individually got to decide our late policies. I had to make sure that my late policy was written in my course syllabus, posted as a day one announcement, and verbalized in class. In fact, to prove myself, I would put it in the slide decks as well, the slide decks that got posted on the course program, so that I could reference the slides and go, oh, and I can say, I referenced the late policy on this day, and this day. So students couldn't say that it was a surprise. But also, if you don't come to class, because this ties into that first thing, if you don't come to class, we can still use that against you. Next, we can cite, and this is one of the due diligence items that gets really messy, is plagiarism, cheating, and AI use. Now, AI use really started to explode in my last semester of teaching, and I had a wild experience with that. I'll tell that story in another video. There was so much that an instructor could flag a student for, but there was so much that a student could actually do to respond. And I'm going to give you all those secrets. We'll talk about this as another problem, but it ties back here. Onboarding was way too fast, and new instructors weren't really trained that well. So we were kind of taught the concept of Turnitin, which is what we used to detect cheating, plagiarism, in some cases AI, when it was coming towards that. But some instructors would just look at a score and say, you had a 40% Turnitin score, plagiarized. But Turnitin is very nuanced. You have to actually read and see what it's flagging. I was always looking for mass sections that were copied, or I'd commonly see mass sections that were copied with one word replaced, and those wouldn't be highlighted. That was still evidence of plagiarism, though, because you could tell someone had copied it and tried to change a little bit so they thought it would fly under the radar, which it never did. And AI was so contentious because at first we were told, hey, we're enabling Turnitin's AI detector. At the beginning, we didn't know, and I think we had figured it out, at the end of my semester, my last semester teaching, that Turnitin, had a very high false positive rate. It would claim things were AI generated when it wasn't. So that was a problem. So instructors kind of have to say, hey, I suspect AI use, and give their reasoning why. Students, though, can call the bluff. Literally call the bluff. A lot of instructors would just go to students and say, I think you used AI. 0. That's not enough. If ever an instructor says to you, ever, and especially still at the time of recording, call their bluff. Call their bluff, ask for their logic and their reasoning and evidence, because it was such a messy gray zone. And then the cherry on top of the cake for the cheating and plagiarism and AI accusations. Conestoga faculty have a prescribed length of time to make the accusation. When I taught, it may be different, but when I taught, and this is one thing that made teaching so stressful, when I taught, from the assignment due date and due time, an instructor had 24 hours to make the accusation. If it was outside the 24 hours, the accusation could be called into question, could be null and void. So again, you have to follow the policies, you have to follow the rules. And then students had a equally short amount of time to respond. I think it was 1 to 3 business days. They had an equally short time that they had to respond. And if they didn't respond, it was an admission of guilt. And you could enact whatever penalty you wanted. And all of this is why, at the time, and I suspect they still do this, it's important to go to the student association when you are at risk of failing a course or an accusation is made against you. Because this was a service that they offered. A student union or a student association member would sit down, review the whole case with you, and would even help you communicate with your instructors. Again, all of this information is available publicly through their ecosystem. You just have to find it, and that's a lot of work. Okay, the next reason why I do not recommend Conestoga College is because a wild variable that will impact your education, and I know these principles still apply today and even past when I stopped teaching. A wild variable is your instructor, because instructors are not always consistent. And in fact, inconsistencies can be wild. In my department, in my program, when I taught in the financial technology, it was in our handbook that the late policy was totally at the instructor's discretion. So I think of one course, my late policy. I adopted my curriculum guide's late policy. I loved it. He would always accept late work, and I would always accept late work, and I don't care how late it is. And I would accept it until the day I actually had to register the grades with the college, which was anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks after a course had finished. I would accept all late work, but anything that was late by a minute, by an hour, by a day, by a week, 15% off, because I as an instructor do not believe in not accepting late work. No. If you did the work, if you can somehow demonstrate learning outcomes, you should be graded for that. You should be assessed. You should get marks for it. None of this like the 5% per day for 5 days, and then they wouldn't accept it and you'd get a 0. So that created inconsistencies. Because I was onboarded so fast and training went by so fast, I didn't know to check Turnitin scores for my entire first 2 terms, which is the equivalent of 1 whole semester. 1 whole semester teaching like 4 different classes. I didn't know to check Turnitin for plagiarism. So I probably let so much plagiarism slide without even knowing it because I wasn't trained and didn't know to check for it. Speaking of onboarding, let's talk about it. I have to this day never met a Conestoga instructor who was happy or satisfied, who felt supported in their onboarding, in how we are hired. Because many of us were hired during like this frenzy rise of and a wild influx of international students. It is very common to be hired anywhere from a couple weeks to before your course started. I was hired technically 3 weeks before my course started, but that was over Christmas when the college was closed for most of that time. But from like 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week, I know someone who got hired 2 days before their course started. When you get hired to learn how to teach and the online ecosystem and policies and procedures, they kind of put you through almost like mini courses on their own. So you kind of experience like what the students experience with their online learning system. But there is so much information, and it's very easy to just like go reference the information, go like, okay, I recognize that, boom, move on. And it's only ever taught as if everything is done perfectly in a perfect world, and it's not. So for example, like I was taught, and in one of the training modules, it says like, you get a progress bar for how complete your course setup is. And then you should do stuff to make it 100%. I was handed courses with 20%, 30% completion. And I've learned in my like probably second last semester of teaching, like, oh no, your course will be fine. It will function fine if it's at 85 or 90% complete. Next, sometimes within this vein of like onboarding, support, inconsistencies, faculty don't talk to each other. The college didn't really do anything to connect us. So when I taught in financial technology, which was the largest program I taught in, I only ever knew who other instructors were if they were in the room. If my students literally had back-to-back classes and they had just had class with another instructor. That's the only way that I met other faculty. So we're not talking about course best practices or consistencies. I was teaching a consulting course, and the curriculum guide, the head of the course, they said, your curriculum guide is this person. I knew who they were. They didn't know who I was. If I hadn't reached out to them, we never would have talked. There's no mentorship, there's no peer support, and there's no phones. No faculty, no staff ever listed their phone number, so everything was done by email, and you'd have to wait an expected 1 to 3 business days for responses to emails. But if your request was required within 1 to 2 business days, you were kind of on your own. All of this to say, if you do go to Conestoga, when you do get an instructor, reach out and ask them how long they've been teaching at Conestoga. If they're a new faculty member, expect chaos. Next, if you feel like your instructor doesn't like you, chances are it's not that they don't like you, it's that they're overworked and underpaid or appreciated, because the working conditions are not ideal. First, one thing that definitely affected my attitude, especially towards the end of my teaching career, we are technically only paid for classroom time. So one course I taught, I was paid for what was called contact hours. I was paid for 3 contact hours. Even though in my first semester, I had to develop all of my materials because the course had only ever been done online asynchronously, and I had to bring it in person and synchronously. I was not paid to develop those materials. I was not paid for marking. I was not paid for prep. I was not paid for email and follow-up support with students. I was only paid for the physical time I was in the classroom, which I do understand kind of some logic that like you can, okay, take those hours, kind of divide it by 2, or take what you're getting paid, divide it by 2, and then double your hours. But at that rate, I definitely was not making decent money. And compared to other schools, Conestoga pays okay. They don't pay the worst I've ever seen. They definitely don't pay the best. Next, and this is such a weird one. Attendance requirements are the weirdest thing on the planet at Conestoga. So Conestoga's school-wide policy is that attendance cannot be mandatory. It cannot be required. It cannot be graded. There were a couple exceptions to that. In like the ones that immediately come to my mind were nursing, practical nursing, and respiratory therapy, like the health sciences. Those folks had mandatory attendance. I would like to know that a nurse that's trying to save my life, though, went to class. But I would guess like 95% of all the programs at Conestoga, you could not require attendance, you could not mark attendance, you could not make it mandatory. But instructors, we were told, you have to take attendance every class. And it's funny because it started with us. I remember in my onboarding trainings, there was probably like 10 of us, and we would ask like, well, and we'd been told all this, and we're like, hold on. So we can't require attendance. It's not mandatory, but we have to take it. And it's because they had danced around and hadn't told us kind of this thing about the due diligence checklist to fail students. That said, instructors, it depends on the course, it depends, and then a little bit on the instructor, we would find ways to bake it into a course so that like a graded item could only be done in class. That's a way that we could make attendance required. So I remember I had so many students who would ask, it was a very common question of, well, why do you take attendance? Is it graded? How much of my grade is it worth? Or they'd ask like, can I have a leave of absence or try to get like an excused absence for a day? And I'd have to say, well, no, it's not graded and it's not mandatory and it's not required. But if you fail the course, like, how do I say like, oh, well, if you fail the course, then I can use it against you. And it seals your fate to make sure you fail and you have to retake the class. Like, it's not the nicest conversation to have. Next, and this one broke my heart probably the most when I learned how this sausage was made. Sometimes courses are put into programs simply to fill Ontario Ministry of Training and Colleges to fulfill their requirements and to make them happy. It's why you may see programs that like have a course taken out and then a course added or substituted or changed. So if the course feels like it doesn't make sense in the program, it may just be to fulfill a ministry requirement. The ministry will say, okay, to offer this program, your students must have like 100 credit hours per semester. So they'll go, okay, this class will be 20 credit hours, this class will be, 50 or whatever, and they'll go, oh, we have another 10 credit hours we have to fill. What do we do? So in one program that I taught a class on consulting and starting a consulting business. And I looked at like the whole program, and what the students were learning. I didn't really know about, it was in the cloud data management program. I don't really know a lot about cloud data management. By that point, I had figured out like, oh, here's why we do it. Here's when we do it. Here's what it looks like. But I had asked the curriculum guide, like, why are we teaching our students about consulting? And they were the one who told me, oh, it's simply to fulfill ministry credit hours because there was a gap for 42 credit hours. And a recent labor market report had indicated that consulting was really booming in the Kitchener-Waterloo region. So we think consulting is a skill that our students would benefit from learning, or a type of business they'd be interested in starting. And you got to remember, courses are developed sometimes by people who have a background in education, not in the field they're teaching. So this particular curriculum guide, I think had a master's degree in education and in teaching, but didn't really know consulting. In fact, they developed a consulting course despite having not been a successful consultant. And I'll leave that there because consulting is not for everybody. But the curriculum guide was taking notes for me because I was updating the slides because I'm like, okay, I've not only consulted, I've made 6 figures consulting on my own. So here's some tips into actually how to do this successfully. The fact that I had to put that in because a not industry expert developed a course That causes me concern. Speaking of the college curriculum, my next concern about Conestoga College is that the curriculum does not stay up to date by their own design. There are mainly two ways, or at least what I taught, there are mainly two ways that curriculum got changed. One, if a major industry change had happened and a faculty member, an instructor, someone with power within the college instigated a change and could actually prove that something big was happening. And it had been within a reasonable amount of time. Or two, the college had set a certain number of years. It was either 3 or 5 years. I think it was actually 5 years. Every 5 years, curriculum would be reviewed and updated. This is why there are complaints of content being outdated, because sometimes it's approaching its 5-year mark before it's being updated. So for example, I taught a course on search engine optimization, SEO. I was given slides and curriculum that referenced material from 2 years prior, because that's the last time that the course had been updated and developed. SEO changes very quickly. In fact, I had put into my course, I taught my students where to go, especially for Google, where to go and find updates. And they saw that updates happen monthly. So by the time I was teaching the course, 24 different updates at least had happened. So I had to update it, but I wasn't able to test my students on the updated material. Quick side note, and something I should explain. This has been from a contract faculty's member's perspective. I was not a full-time professor. I was contract faculty. Some of this will apply to full-time faculty, but let me tell you, now I have some details that will impact if you have a full-time faculty member teaching. So first thing you should know about full-time professors and faculty, they work full-time for the college. So they make a very full-time salary, and usually a very good salary, expected to work very full-time. And with that, and because of that, they almost never work outside the college. So let's cut to the chase. If your instructor is a full-time faculty member, they are probably not practicing in the industry that they are teaching. You should also know, and this comes back to the point on inconsistencies between instructors, full-time profs are more accountable for rule following. So like, I would cancel classes or move them online when I was not supposed to, but full-time profs, if they did that, they'd get in so much trouble. So they might be more sticklers for rules and stick to policies, which again, just makes the experience more inconsistent. And let me finish all of this with my final story, the cherry on top of the cake. So I was let go, not fired, because you don't get fired in higher ed, you just don't get your contracts renewed. So I was let go, despite my promotions, despite my glowing reviews of teaching. I was let go for being honest about policies that harmed students. Because when teaching international students, it's mainly contract faculty, and we had been told like you shouldn't cancel classes, and I was literally told the day before, don't cancel class, but we had a horrible snowstorm and many students didn't feel safe, and I didn't feel safe going to school. So I got in trouble for being honest. And then my final experience with Conestoga, and this was after I had left, which is kind of telling. I was honest one more time, and I had one last interaction with the college. So in February of 2024, and I'm just referencing my notes to make sure I get this right. In February of 2024, John Tibbetts, in a public interview, it was in a public forum, there was an event, made some really inappropriate comments, especially about another dean of a school, publicly. And he said it on social media. Really inappropriate comments. The college was trying to bury the story, and I had disconnected from everyone on LinkedIn who was connected to the that I knew was connected to the college, but because I still had friends who were connected one way or another, I'd still see a post now and again. I saw a post from someone at Conestoga College praising John Tibbetts and the school for their economic impact on the region. And I commented and said, oh, is that the same picture from the event where John Tibbetts made wildly inappropriate comments about another person? And here it is. A school official, I can't say who, privately contacted me asking me to remove the comment. And they said, Tim, you have a large following. We have a large following. Our following will see your comment. The person whose post you commented on, they'll see it. Your people will see it. And get this, they said, we know the John Tibbetts situation with his public comment was a disaster. Can you please delete your comment? So again, Conestoga's ethics and morals, where they said, we know we screwed up and we don't want to admit it. And we are trying to secretly bury this and hide it. Can you please be a part of burying it and hiding it? And that was my experience at Conestoga College. That is why I hesitate to recommend the college to people. Whew, that's a lot. Comment and let me know. Here's what I actually want to know. Did any of this surprise you? Ask me your questions in the comments. I will answer as I am able to. I have to remind you all, everything I have said in this video is publicly verifiable one way or another. It is based entirely on my experience, things I experienced, things I saw, and my perceptions of what I saw. And in the comments and in any further online dialogue, I have to keep it to what is publicly verifiable and what I'm allowed to say. Because even though I no longer teach there, I'm still bound by rules of privacy and confidentiality. Otherwise, make sure you like and subscribe for all things higher ed, business, mental health, photography, and life. Otherwise, we'll chat soon. Bye for now.